8.5 minutes after 7 o'clock in Trinidad and Tobago, and as per usual, most times we get going on a Monday morning and the second hour with a business breakfast segment. And who better to have for a business breakfast segment than the Central Bank Governor, Joala Rambarran, because in his presentation of the bank's 2014 monetary policy, he said that in a 2-year period, over $1 billion was spent on foreign credit card purchases in Trinidad and Tobago. US $530 million last year, and so far for the year, $570 million for 2014. And as we said at the start of the program, we'll probably get up to $600 million by the time the Christmas and New Year season is over. Well, as I mentioned, we are joined now by Mr. Rambarran for a discussion on this and other matters related to the economy. Governor Rambarran, good to have you on the program.
Thanks for having me.
And by the way, he's walked with a brand new $50, the new one that has been put out. I think we have a shot of it that we can show you. There it is. We have it here with us. It's a plasticky type of material. It's something that we see in Canadian currency and Australian currency as well. Governor Rambarran, let me give it to you back fast before you say I'll take your $50 and we'll miff it afterwards. This new currency, is it counterfeit proof?
Yes, this is actually made from polymer. Polymer is the material of the future for money, and as we've said, it makes it virtually impossible to counterfeit. We have 17 security features on this $50 bill. A good bit of them I can't tell you, but most of them we have it on our website, and you could actually go into the details on it.
I suppose it will always be said that it's virtually counterfeit proof, but at the end of the day, the counterfeiters always find some way either to get ahead of the game. Are we going to see all denominations of our currency going this way eventually?
Well, firstly, we've just released this new $50 into circulation last week, Monday. Depending on the reaction of the public to the 50, then we'll take a decision around whether we go to polymer in respect of the other currency family. So far, our feedback from the public is overwhelmingly successful, that everyone says we would like to see polymer as the currency.
How costly is that as far as producing, shifting all our entire currency notes to this polymer type?
All right, let's put it this way. A typical polymer note would last at least 2.5 times versus a typical cotton note. Most of the central banks that are using polymer are still on a 7 to 8 year cycle, which means that this could continue going on for almost 10 years before you put another one into series, another series into circulation. For us, the initial cost is really the capital cost, but then we recoup that over time, let's say over a 10-year period, because we don't have to produce as many notes and put them back into circulation. So you're actually saving tremendously on the cost of issuing currency. And
of course, based on the data that was provided leading up to this weekend, people hardly using any kind of currency anymore other than the credit cards. You know, and let's put that in context, because we're talking about a situation where 1.1 billion US dollars, that's roughly what, 8 billion Trinidad and Tobago dollars over a 2-year period in online foreign purchases in Trinidad and Tobago. How does that compare for an economy of our size?
All right, before I even answer that for you, bear in mind, this is a society that is also, it is a cash-based society. We've actually seen currency in circulation rise continuously every year, typically around 5 to 6% a year. And even with that, you also seen, as you've indicated, a rise in terms of online purchases. That has come from a very small base of around, let's say, 50 million about 5 years ago. So now we're looking at almost 10 times the size, $500 million. In terms of the size of the economy, it is pretty much large in relation to the total demand for foreign exchange. We're looking at about a $7 to $8 billion market for foreign exchange. Therefore, this year we may earn, somewhere about 600 million. That's a tremendous size by itself.
That's 600 million US.
Demand, 600 million US.
Yeah.
versus over a 7 billion base.
How much of how does that affect the supply of U.S. currency in the general market? This demand, this online demand.
Yeah. Well, what it means then is that the demand goes to that particular category, and therefore you may have, let's say, businesses, for example, who might be looking for foreign exchange might then realize that demand has moved to another area, and you now need to find that particular supply. So it makes it a lot more challenging.
How difficult is that to measure, as far as, because we have the traditional ways of measuring economic activity. We now have this online phenomenon, which, as you said, is growing by a phenomenal rate over the last 5 years, and you probably expect it to increase by the same exponential rate over the next few years. How does the central bank monitor a situation like that, and how it impacts upon the overall measurement of our economy?
All right, we get this data directly from the commercial banks, right? Every day we have an assessment of the inflows and outflows into the banking system with respect to foreign exchange. And that is basically what we'll tabulate, and we get a pretty good sense of what does the demand look like, the composition of demand, the levels of demand, the growth rates in demand, and then we know what the supply would be looking like. So we have a pretty good assessment of what the state of demand is for foreign exchange.
And moving beyond the issue of foreign exchange itself, I'm taking it more along the line, Mr. Rambarran, of economic activity, because I'm sure the business community, Trinidad and Tobago based business community, and this, they might have been asking themselves this question before, you know, where's all the business going? People have been asking this question in the Christmas period. Well, it appears at least some of that business has gone online and gone to the United States. How are you able to measure that, to quantify that for the benefit of the business community to understand?
In terms of the demand for foreign exchange, yes. In terms of maybe what you see now, the number of suppliers who are providing that sort of direct-to-door delivery services, we also have a pretty good sense of that. What will also change this landscape for ZIR in the next 2 to 3 years is the fact that at the central bank, we're looking at bringing on electronic service providers. And that means that the market itself is going to open up, it's going to become a lot more competitive, and therefore businesses and banks need to look at online as another form of competition that they're going to have to contend with.
Are we in a position, from the central bank's regulatory role, to keep pace with this particular environment, the online environment?
We have to. In terms of, we have an entire supervision department that is being resourced up. We're actually bringing in people from the private sector with significant experience to undertake that type of supervisory work. As a matter of fact, this year, we have ramped up our supervisory activities in respect of what the anti-money laundering and counter-financing terrorism activities, simply because next year, in a matter of 3 weeks, we will be faced with a mutual evaluation exercise that is of significant concern to this country.
I want to get to that in a moment, because your comments earlier this month seem to get under the skin of the certainly the Chamber of Commerce based on their comments last week. We'll touch on that in a moment. But just on the issue of the online credit card purchasing, I know we often hear of many of the so-called first world nations talking about the levels of credit card debt and how much of a strain that is putting on their economies. United States, Australia, and so on. There's an increasing concern about consumers getting themselves deeper and deeper into debt based on credit card, and therefore online purchasing will contribute towards that. Do you have any data as far as that kind of situation, as far as credit card debt?
Yes, we have that data. The central bank have actually spoken about that at the last annual meeting of our Financial Services Ombudsman, where we talked about the level of credit card debt outstanding. Now, at the moment, it's not an issue. But as we look into next year and we see that interest rates are on the rise, it means that credit card debt will become a lot more costly. And therefore, some persons would need to take account of whether they might be able to make those payments and whether they could continue using their credit cards in the manner they've been accustomed to.
Is that something that the central bank sees as important to educate the public? Because I know periodically the central bank will give out these advisories and consumer beware and how you spend your money and that sort of thing. Are you seeing a threshold in the not too distant future where it will be necessary for the central bank to intervene via education as to this whole question of maybe a mounting credit card debt?
Not necessarily in terms of the credit card debt, but in general in terms of consumer spending and consumer behavior in the financial sector and the whole aspect of consumer protection. We have two agencies at the central bank. One, of course, is the Financial Services Ombudsman, which will deal with the complaints. And the other is the Financial Inclusion Development Agency, which is really more the education and financial literacy arm of the central bank. Both agencies have a work program as we move into next year that will deal with how do we educate the consumer around financial consumer protection issues.
How could this impact negatively, or how does it impact on the economy if you have mounting levels of credit card debt and people actually having greater and greater difficulty to service that sort of credit card debt?
It will be an issue for Zir, but bear in mind that is not the larger component of consumer debt. The largest is always on mortgages. Yeah, that we have to bear in mind, and then car loans.
So, and you've given a bit of a, I wouldn't say a pessimistic outlook for 2015, but you've given a dose of reality to the general public earlier this year. The combination of all these issues, the falling oil prices, a bit of concern as to how that is going to impact on the economy. Are you concerned that these other issues of debt, car loans, mortgages, and the relatively minor issue of credit card debt, is that going to put a greater strain on the economy as far as servicing these debts?
It's a catch-22 in a sense, because these are the areas of the non-energy sector that have actually shown growth and have helped to show up economic activity. So as we move into 2015, these are areas that we have to basically manage carefully. It's not that they're going to contract significantly, but at least bring them down to levels where they're pretty much sustainable and they don't pose challenges, particularly on the debt side for consumers and on the non-performing loan side for the financial institutions.
Yes, you want the non-energy sector to grow, but not to grow to the extent where the debt becomes unmanageable and presents a major problem. Coming on to 7:21 in Trinidad and Tobago, it's an extended business breakfast segment with the governor of the central bank, Joala Rambarran. We've seen his $50 note. We'll find out about his comments earlier this month in relation to the issues of the business sector and dealing with foreign transactions in that regard. And the whole question of terrorism, how does that come in? We'll be back right after this. $7.25 coming up towards 7:26 in Trinidad and Tobago. Just one more quick point in relation to this credit card debt thing that we're talking about on credit card purchasing. When it comes to prioritizing payments, accessing money from the commercial banks, we were discussing this off air. The banks first and foremost must pay off credit card balances. Is that correct?
Yes, that's correct, Fazir. The first call on the US dollar demand is for banks to pay off the credit card debt first and foremost. Afterwards, so if you're a businessman and you're coming to access foreign exchange from the banks, you have to wait for that credit card purchases to be paid off in total before you can be served. And I think that is what consumers need to be aware of. That is what business persons need to be aware of, that there is a first port of call ahead of you in the line.
And it takes us back to the issue with this growth in credit card online purchases, most of them done in US dollars. How much is that going to impact on business people, ordinary citizens accessing foreign currency in next year, for example?
All right, let me put it in context. So far this year, Central Bank has sold $1.7 billion into the market to meet the supply shortfall. Compare that 1.7 billion against 600 billion purely around online purchases, and you see that it means that there's a significant, right, call on the foreign exchange resources.
So 1.7 billion and 600 million US.
Yeah, if you just match it back like that, you realize that if we didn't have that level of online demand, then our intervention into the market would have been smaller.
Let's talk about this issue, because time is going by very quickly. This whole question of your comments earlier this year in relation to suggesting whether or not there are involvements with business partners abroad who might be involved in terrorist activity. And in the interest of fairness, let me quote you based on what was said on December the 1st, and you can correct me if this is a misrepresentation. We've noticed a trend where businesses make noise for foreign exchange to pay bills for trade-related purposes and actively lobby the authorized dealers and the central bank for US dollars. When the money is provided, the funds are promptly deposited in their foreign currency account and left unused, and the noise about not being able to get money for business continues. I do have one tip for businesses trying to get foreign exchange. It helps if you don't conduct business with companies with terrorist links, as we have strict laws on anti-money laundering and combating the financing of terrorism. Is that a correct reflection of what you said?
Let's put all that in context for you. Money laundering and terrorism financing are essentially both sides of the same coin. They are financial crimes that have the potential to damage the integrity of our financial system. We must understand and be totally aware that Trinidad and Tobago and the Caribbean is in the north-south zone when it comes to the narcotics drug trade. And therefore we are very vulnerable as an economy to those particular transaction flows. Third point, we've emerged as a regional financial center. We have no controls on capital, we have free trade. And that means we will have both legal and illegal transaction flows taking place in the economy. And as a regulator, as a prime regulator of the financial system, is incumbent on the central bank to ensure that these financial crimes are non-existent or at the minimum, so that we do not damage our financial system.
But was it irresponsible of you to make a comment like that? Because it implies that there are business people in Trinidad and Tobago who are engaged in transactions with businesses, with companies, with terrorist links. Do you have hard evidence of that?
Okay, let's again, context again. As I said, in January of next year, we are facing the 4th round mutual evaluation exercise that will basically test how strong and how effective is our anti-money laundering and combating the financing of terrorism regime. In that regard, the central bank has signed an MOU with both the SEC and the Financial Intelligence Unit. So all 3 regulators are now collaborating on money laundering and terrorism financing. We have actually stepped up a lot of our supervisory activities over the past year to meet this mutual evaluation exercise. I have actually taken away the license of one bureau de change because its money laundering and terrorism financing regime was not strong enough. Right? We have seen several instances, I can't name them, where there are issues around suspicious transactions. If you actually take a look at the annual report of the Financial Intelligence Unit, you will see almost 1,000 suspicious transactions were reported over the last 3 years to the law enforcement agencies. So we have to be aware that at the end of the day, once you have organized crime, it must interact with the formal economy. It doesn't stay on its own. Money laundering means you take what you have from illicit gains and you bring it into the formal system. It must touch the formal system. Therefore, whether you're a financial institution, whether you're a businessman, or whether you're a regulator, is an incumbent on all of us to be aware of who we do business with.
How would you describe your relationship as far as your role as central bank governor and the business sector? Because I'm just looking at this response and the way it was framed. It's almost like saying business crying out for US, but as soon as they get it, they hide it in their account and they don't use it. So what is all your story? And then on top of that, all you have to be careful whether you're all dealing with businesses with terrorist links. It sounds as if there's an antagonistic relationship that you have with the business sector?
No, I don't think it's an antagonistic relationship. I think it's part of what the central bank is doing in terms of providing the right advice to the business community and to the national community. These issues concern us all, and we need to be aware of it. We can't be in denial around what surrounds us and what has implications for how the financial sector is perceived and how the economy is perceived at the end of the day by the international community.
But do you appreciate where the business sector might say, for example, okay, Governor, we take that point, but when you make a statement like that, it gives a broad brush to the entire business sector without you identifying anybody?
Well, Fazir, I think you could appreciate we cannot identify the specific firms or the specific institutions where we've seen those particular issues. That is where the FIU is there to do the particular investigation. What we do is we attempt to sensitize, inform, and let the national community understand what these issues are. Because it's very simple. If at the end of the mutual evaluation exercise, Trinidad and Tobago's regime is found to not be sufficiently robust, what does it mean? A very simple transaction that you want to do overseas with your supplier becomes a lot more difficult. The checks are a lot more stringent, the paperwork is a lot more, and sometimes we reach the point where they say, I don't want to do business with you. So we have to ensure that we have as clean as possible a regime in Trinidad and Tobago.
And that next check comes up in January, you're saying? That
check comes up in 3 weeks' time. That's a mutual evaluation exercise.
And based on what has been happening so far, are we on course for a good report? How do we stand at the moment?
It's very difficult at the moment to say where we stand. What I could say is the evaluation exercise is based on 2 key pillars. The first one is the level of technical capability and the level of legislative work that you have in place. And you've seen over the last few months that we have actually upgraded the legislation around money laundering and terrorism financing. The second is where we're going to be challenged, which is the effectiveness of the regime we have in place. Have you prosecuted anybody? Have you stopped certain entities from coming into your financial system? Have you closed off any particular accounts that you think have raised red flags and are deemed suspicious transactions? That is where I think is a lot more challenging for us, and that is where I've said we need to be aware of who we may be dealing with in doing business. That's all.
Are you worried about that element of the study, the examination when it is being done? Because in the criminal justice system, we see all of these issues about prosecution and arrest and actual conviction. If we take it now to the level of white-collar crime, or what is perceived to be white-collar crime, we hardly hear of any sorts of prosecutions or convictions and so on. Is that going to be a stain on our record?
Well, I wouldn't say stain. It may turn out to be a deficiency in the regime, and one that we would have to correct.
How do you correct that? Because, I mean, that's out of your control. I don't know if you have any powers of arrest.
Yeah, that's not from the central bank. That's what you have are regulators working together with the law enforcement agencies, including the Ministry of National Security. So this is, as I say, this is everybody's business. One way how we do that is also to ensure that we send a very strong, clear, and consistent message to those who may wish to use our system for money laundering and terrorism financing purposes, and that message must be that crime does not pay.
Yet it appears, Mr. Rambarran, with the great respect, that crime pays and pays exceptionally well in Trinidad and Tobago as in other jurisdictions. And I know it was not under your...
Do you have the evidence for you?
I will find the evidence here. I will show you to you. I don't want no lawyers in material this hour of the morning. But it wasn't under your watch, but people always draw reference to how could a large institution as CLICO get by without any audited reports and still be allowed to be in business with a central bank regulator floating about the place. Is that something that the central bank has tightened up on, that whole question of the regulation of our institutions?
When it comes to the insurance sector, I think you might be aware that we do have an insurance bill that is going before Parliament early next year. And that bill is a landmark bill in terms of how it changes our enforcement capability and how it upgrades the type of behaviors expected from the insurance companies. The second, as I've said, is we've actually resourced up our supervisory capacity at the central bank. So we're looking to see how best, as a regulator, we could step up to the game and ensure that an issue or crisis like LICO does not happen again. And that's what I've spent the better part of the last 2.5 years doing.
Just on the issue of US dollars and the issue of businesses wanting US dollars, some may refer to it as hoarding. Some may say, look, it's always a struggle to get US dollars. So if I can get a 20 tau this week, I'm going to, even though I don't need the 20 tau right now, I'm going to buy the 20 tau. Is there something wrong in that? Is that because if it is that you're not confident in the regular supply of US currency, wouldn't you try, if you have the resources, to buy as much as you can when you can get it?
Well, we've always exhibited that particular behavior for zero since 1993. We've always had this penchant for unrevealed preference for US dollars. What I could tell you is, from the viewpoint of the central bank, our policy is clear. We are there to meet the shortfall in the market, and we've consistently done that. We have not deviated from that policy. As we move into next year, we are putting together another program of foreign exchange intervention to meet the supply shortfall in the market.
And we just have a few seconds left, Governor. And just on that point, I know this is something we're going to probably discuss a lot more heading into the new year and beyond. It seems to bewilder ordinary citizens like myself when you hear the central bank, through yourself or others, say, look, we have met the market requirements. Yet to go into a central bank and they say you can't get that today, you can't get.
You mean you're going to a bank?
Sorry, not the central bank. You go to a commercial bank and they say no, you can't even get 200 today. We don't have any available. How is that possible?
Now, that is an area that we've also been speaking to the banks about. When it comes to having actual US cash availability. Again, because of money laundering and terrorism financing, what you found is that the number of banks in the US that are willing to supply actual US cash to our banking system has actually dwindled. So there's essentially reliance on only one bank. What we've done as a central bank is to now step in, and we now have actual US cash that would be available as a shortfall, as a stopgap, in the event that the banking system is running low on actual US cash. So that should not be an issue, that you walk into your bank branch and you ask for actual cash and they tell you it's not there. We've asked the banks to also lift their branch limits to a higher level to accommodate that particular demand.
Is that a seasonal request based on Christmas, Carnival?
You will typically, it varies across the season, but what we've said is, because we will be there to meet the shortfall, you should not be turned away.
Well, the next time I'm turned away, I'll give somebody a call.
Yes, do that.
To get some clarification on exactly what has happened. Governor Rambarran, always good to get your perspective. And I suspect that in the new year, God willing, we'll be spending some more time discussing some other issues to better understand the management of a fast-developing financial sector, especially the online element of it, and what is going on with that and how much that is impacting on the economy right here in Trinidad and Tobago. Interesting business breakfast segment this morning. We'll be back after this.